So Nate and I will have the pleasure of presenting the Golden Thumb to Ama Asante.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I'm going to kiss you first. And I'm going to kiss you first. And then do it. And make you up for it.
We will keep it for you until it's over. I'd like to call out on stage as well Rebecca Theodore Vachon to help me conduct the question and answer session.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Where would you like me?
I'm going to put you in the center.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you all for staying.
It was so beautiful and so well done.
Thank you. Thank you.
First of all, this is one of those stories I'm beginning to call hidden figure stories that are based on truth, and people had no idea that something like this existed. How did you come across the story, and why did you decide to do this movie?
Sure. Well, I mean, I think the reality is that history has always been written about those who had the power at the time, and they were usually white and they were usually male, and so women's stories, and particularly black women's stories, just faded into the background. So I came across the story after I'd been quite sick. I was in hospital, and my producer, Damien Jones, who is married to an African-American woman, had been to Kenwood House and had seen a print of the painting that this film is based on. And his wife had said to him, you know, you ought to make a film about this woman. And he sent to my agent, who eventually sent me the postcard, a postcard of the painting, and it came to me while I was in hospital. And I looked at this painting, and of course it's extraordinary in so many ways. I kept looking at it, and I kept staring at the two women, and then covering up Elizabeth and just looking at Dido Belle, and then covering up Dido Belle and just looking at Elizabeth. And you see two different things. But what you see when you have both of them there is you can make a comparison, show everything that Dido Belle was and everything that she wasn't. You can look at all the stereotypes that might have existed at the time, and you can look at how those might be able to be broken by comparing the white girl and the black girl. And I always knew I wanted to tell a story that put the woman of color front and center, but I knew that I needed to place her in a context, and that's what Elizabeth allowed me to do in terms of being a woman of the time as well. And so I began to research, and the majority of research, information that I found was about Lord Mansfield, because he was the Lord Chief Justice of England. He was the powerful one. And so it was a question of, there was no quintessential book. There is now, thank goodness, after the film, written by the brilliant Paula Byrne. And she brought out the companion book to our film. But at the time, there was no quintessential book, so it was about piecing all of the little tiny bits of information together and trying to trace them into some background that I could put together and then create a story from that. So that's how it began for me.
How long was the process from beginning to end of trying to piece things together and then shooting the movie?
I started in 2010, and we shot the movie in 2012, and the movie came out I believe the movie came out in 2013-14, between America and the UK. So it was quite some time. My producer had been trying to get a movie off the ground for many, many years. First of all, a TV drama for HBO, and then eventually a movie, and then eventually when he decided that he wanted to start again on the process, that was when he came to me. And in the beginning, I really thought there was no way they would ever want to finance the version of the story that I would want to tell, because the version that he'd been trying to tell before was very much about Dido, Belle, and Elizabeth, and it was very different, and Elizabeth had an affair with John Davinier and all of this, and I wanted to tell a really pure love story, but most importantly, a story where the love was between herself and her. You know, it was about her relationship with herself and how self-love emerges. And the other key love story for me is the paternal love story between niece and uncle, or father and daughter, whichever way you choose to look at it. It was an ode to my own father, who passed away during the making of the film. And so, you know, I had a great relationship with my father, and I wanted to pay homage to that.
I know that Rebecca has a question for you, but I have one thing that really struck me again in watching the movie tonight is how you created such a parallel between Elizabeth and Dido Belle, their looks, their clothing, their mannerisms, their everything, to show that but for the color of their skin, they were. But anyway, will you talk about that?
You know, right from the very beginning, when I looked at the painting, I saw 2 English roses. And in the same way that, you know, roses come in many types, if you like, within the context of being a rose, I wanted to say to you guys as an audience, I want to present you a very British period drama, but let me also at the same time to you present you an English rose that you may not have seen before. Let me put to you that there may be many types of English roses, and this is another for me to present to you. So it was very important to have them together to understand that, you know, woman is woman, and we all have our unique experiences, and as a black female, Dido Elizabeth Belle was having her unique experience within a white household, but she was a woman and she was British. And I wanted Elizabeth there, as I say, in order to show exactly what she was, but also to show exactly what she didn't have access to as well. By showing Elizabeth being at the table, I was able to really emphasize Dido Belle not being at the table. And what that means, I think it's a great metaphor for today in many ways.
One of my favorite scenes in the movie was when Belle looks in the mirror and kind of tears at her skin, and just the battle that she has with her hair. And also just like wanted to ask you about doing that balance between race and class and gender, and how you were able to achieve bringing that to the big screen.
Yeah. Well, I had to do it in layers. I couldn't do it all in one go. It was really important for me to, with each draft, to work on each theme, each topic at one time. It was impossible for me to try and balance all of those things together. Some of it came naturally just from being a woman who is black, and simply just in my life having to balance those things knowingly or unknowingly every day. But the scene in the mirror was really important for me because I had a suspicion that this film might also be a film that would attract young women. So girls who were not children anymore, but they were not quite women yet. And what that burden is of that society can put on you sometimes of being self, you know, you're not slim enough, you're not shapely enough, your hair isn't right, your face isn't right, you know, all of that pressure. And what happens when society puts a burden on you, but also when we put that burden on ourselves, because we take it on, sometimes we absorb it. And, you know, the big question for me was how you bring up that issue of non-acceptance of self at its very extreme, self-hatred, in the context of a very gentle British period drama. And there were many questions about whether we should have that scene in there or not. And I was determined I wanted to have this scene in there. You know, even when I wanted to write it in the first place, there were questions. But then just at the last minute in the edit, there was a question of whether it should come out. And it is sanitized a little from what we shot, from what Gugu and I shot, but I think it still gets the point across. And also it means that I could place her somewhere in order to take her on a journey, so that by the time you get to self-acceptance, you're all there with her because you've been with her in that moment where you've really understood beneath the skin, literally, what is going on with her.
And then the great thing about this movie is I had never heard of the Zong massacre until Belle came out, which just shows you there's just so much about the transatlantic slave trade that we don't know about, particularly from the British side. So was there ever a question or a desire to show the Zong massacre? Because I think that was the one thing I did like about Belle, is that we didn't see that. So we were kind of experiencing it from Belle's point of view.
Yeah. I believe there was a version of the script that came long prior to me coming on board, and I believe in that version of the script they would cut back and forth to the slaves floating in the water. I wanted to make a very different kind of film, and also I think that what you imagine in your mind, if I place you in the correct context, is far worse than actually us trying to recreate that. So I wanted to really go completely the Austen-esque route, but not avoid the horror, which is why we talk about it and why you feel it hopefully through Dido Belle and what it means to her, but we never actually see it. And I wanted to talk about it in an intellectual sense, which would hopefully eventually filter through into an emotional sense. We are drowning slaves because we can get more in insurance than we can on the open market for them. I mean, and we're talking about human beings. And having that conversation in that way, when you actually think about what they're talking about over dinner, is horrific.
I was wondering, I looked up shortly after I saw the movie to see whether there were any descendants of Dido and John, and I think they said that had the bloodline ended, or is that?
In South Africa, I think somewhere in 1976, the final descendants. So there are lots of descendants of Lord Mansfield, who are obviously relatives of Dido, but her actual direct bloodline with John de Vigny died in 76, finished in 76. I believe her grave was recently found in the UK. And a really funny thing that happened, I was living with my husband in the Netherlands at the time that we were making the film. So I had to come over to the UK, and my apartment was rented out, so I had to find an apartment to rent. And I eventually found a place in Knightsbridge. And my assistant came to me one day and said, "Amma, do you know that the apartment you've chosen is on the very street that John de Vigny and Dido Belle lived when they first got married?" And I mean, London is not small. So for that to happen was completely incredible. So I felt, I'm a bit spiritual, and I felt like that was her kind of endorsement to say, I'm cool about you telling my story.
Do you know if they lived in France or had reason to visit France much? Because I heard stories about them relating to France somehow.
I didn't specifically find out that information. I wasn't specifically looking, but what's very interesting about France is that there are certain countries where the biracial children of slaves and gentlemen, either from France or the UK, some of those, the country that sort of raised most of them and had them educated, if that makes sense. I don't mean most of them, but the highest number, I believe, was France. And so it would make sense to me that they could have moved in a crowd in France around about that time. That wouldn't have surprised me. And I just want to say again, there wasn't a lot, but I think the highest number was in France.
And casting, I thought that Gugu Mbatha-Raw, this was the film that really put her on the radar for me. And I think the next thing she did after that was Beyond the Lights, which is totally different. How did you go about finding and casting her for this role?
Well, we knew that it was going to be a great platform for the actress who won the role, and there are so few opportunities for women of color to be able to grasp a role and, carry a movie, and she has to carry this movie. And so we wanted to make sure that we gave every young actress who was even loosely appropriate for the role the opportunity to audition, and we saw them all. And we saw some who were well established and others who were completely new. Gugu had been tracking the project and knew Damien Jones, the producer, for a long time. And so came back to audition several times. And I had met Gugu. I had auditioned her for a film that I've only just made, which is my fourth film, Where Hands Touch. And she had come up for that role. And I had thought she was wonderful, and then that movie collapsed, the financing collapsed, and we only just got it refinanced a couple of years ago. And so she stayed in my mind. She has such a great presence. The key thing is that there were lots of amazing young women that were brilliant actresses, but what Gugu has is an innate elegance. And we were going to have 7 to 8 weeks to shoot this movie, and there were many things that we were going to need a shorthand to, and elegance was one of them. And so the mere fact that, you know, once she put on the corset, along with brilliant Sarah Gadon also, there was an innate elegance that was already there, meant that I could concentrate on performance, I could concentrate on what was going on inside of here, and not have to worry about, was she holding the teacup correctly? Or, you know, I do remember there's this one moment where they're sitting together and they're talking about the boys or the young men, and they have to whisper to each other, and their natural sort of instinct was just to turn and kind of speak to each other. And that was the one moment we really had to focus on posture, because of course the young women at the time would have leant like this, they wouldn't have turned and just sort of spoken like this. So it's things like that that we didn't have to do too much of, because that would have taken up time that we needed to use on performance.
The other thing that really, in watching this again tonight and thinking about United Kingdom, is you're such an assured director. Tell us a little bit about how you started directing. And
yeah, well, I didn't go to film school, and I hope that that's a call to all young women and young men out there that didn't go to film school, that it's a great thing if you do, but you don't have to go to film school. I started off as a child actress, and I was terrible. I was so bad. And that was a good thing for me too. I was a really bad actress, but I had a good eye for good performances. And I was in a TV series in the UK, a high school drama for the BBC at the age of between 14 and 17. And around me were some amazing young actors. And I loved the power of a good performance. So when I was about 21 or so, I gave up acting officially. But I didn't want to leave the business. I wanted to continue to be in a world that told stories and connected to audiences. And so I started writing mainly to get my typing speed up. My mum had sent me to typing college, and I was going to go and become someone's PA, and I had a story in my mind, and I started typing it out one day. And that became a script that was eventually passed around. Fox in Los Angeles, through a really convoluted route, got hold of that script and were deeply encouraging to me. And I came back to the UK and thought, I should send this out. So I sent it out in my mother's maiden name as my pseudonym, because lots of producers in the UK knew me as a young actress and I didn't think they would take me seriously. And I sent it to them, and I got some callbacks to go and meet with some producers, and I thought, oh goodness me, they're going to know who I am, and then they won't want to pursue it. But I ended up getting a 7-script deal with One Network, Channel 4 in the UK, and a 4-script deal with the BBC, and my writing career started. I got 2 TV series off the ground in the UK, and off the back of that I wrote my first film, and it was one of my financiers who suggested that I should direct the movie, given that they felt that I had the best grip on the characters in the world. And so it's an unusual story, but that's how I got into it.
And I know that you like to write and direct.
I
You
do.
like to direct your own material.
I do because for me, I think that there are 2 ways of directing, and I think that one is not better than the other, but I think there's the insider and the outsider. And so, in a way, you know, with something like A United Kingdom, I was very much the outsider. I didn't write that, although my parents are from Ghana in West Africa, and that was the first sub-Saharan African country to gain its independence. I was in David Oyelowo's shoes. David Oyelowo plays a king, a young king who's about to take the reins of his country, but he marries a white woman, and that causes problems between his country, which is a colony of the UK at the time in 1947, the UK, and also South Africa. So on the one hand, I really understood the world because it's the world that my parents grew up in, but he's a guy. And the woman that was in it, who I really understand because I'm a woman, but she was a white English woman in 1947. So I felt like I was still very much an outsider kind of coming into their world, although I had a great connection with their world. Whereas with Belle, I really felt like I was coming from the inside. This was, I felt like I knew what it might be like to walk in the shoes of a black British woman in 18th century London. In many ways. And so I think that there are two ways of directing things, and I like the insider's point of view. I'm about to do a spy movie, which is set in 1977 Moscow, I know, which is tells the story of a guy called Adolf Tolkachev, who became the highest paid, let me get this right, the highest paid employee of the Carter government, even though he never set foot outside of Russia. Because he was a spy and he provided so much information to the Carter government that what he gave to them was in excess of $1 billion worth of intelligence. And that's a different world for me, but I feel like I can bring something to it as that outsider in many ways. So it really depends. It really depends what the story is, but there are some stories that I feel like I need to come at from the inside to kind of bring the authenticity, and other stories where I feel like I can be your eye, I can be the outsider, and we can all bear witness to it together.
There was Riz Ahmed did this brilliant speech for the House of Commons last year where he was talking about being an actor of color from the UK and just...
Was that Idris, did you say?
No, that was Riz Ahmed.
Oh, yes, Riz Ahmed. Yeah.
And he sort of talked about, the challenges, being an actor of color in the UK and having so many period dramas come out, but he can never audition for them because usually they're like, brown people didn't exist until 1957 or whatever. But I just wanted to get your point of view as being a black woman British director. Do you see the tide changing? Is that still a fight for the depiction of people?
I think the tide is changing, and you know what? I'm going to go ahead and take some credit for that. Because I am. Thank you. Because I feel that because of the success of Belle in the US, it has become very, very difficult for those who are responsible for financing and greenlighting and who are the gatekeepers of British period drama to pretend like we didn't exist. It's very, very difficult. And so now I'm completely bombarded by versions of Belle. And I feel like saying, I already did that. So there is no reason for you to resubmit to me a film I already did. But I'm really, really happy for those gates to be opened and for that world to be explored now through the gaze of many different types of people. And the great thing is, most of us love costume dramas. We are looking for fresh, new avenues to enter into those worlds. We're looking for new windows to open. So it only benefits audiences when we allow people of color to be involved in their own stories. I mean, there's one brilliant story that I keep getting kind of suggested to me, which is the story of Queen Victoria's goddaughter, who's a young Nigerian girl. Who came to live with her, Queen Victoria's granddaughter, who was a young Nigerian girl who came to live with Queen Victoria at the time. And that's a story, her name was Sarah, and that's a story that comes to me on a regular basis. And we'll be told, she will get her story. I feel that it's similar to Belle in some ways, and so it shouldn't come from me, it should come from another filmmaker, but it will. And we have great actors in the UK from many different backgrounds, and many of them are of colour, and I think they have so much to bring and offer to these stories that we would be crazy not to allow them these opportunities to shine on the big screen in many ways.
And what about shooting in the US?
I want to. I definitely want to, and I'm looking out for that project that will allow me to. You know, they say that the US catches a cold and the UK sneezes. We are related in so many ways, and that's partly what I wanted to show with Belle as well, that that the origins of slavery, you know, they started in the UK in many ways, and we have relationships, for better or for worse. And I feel that I have something to bring to you all as an artist, so I would love to be able to work on American stories, and I'm absolutely open to reading, on collaborating definitely on ideas, and coming up with something that will be brilliant. I'm about to do something, I can't say what, but I'm about to do something with Will Packer very soon, and there are various people that I'm desperate to work with and collaborate with and bring stories together.
Excuse me, we are going to open up the floor for questions.
Check, check, check.
Microphone.
Oh, do you? Oh, yeah, I see. Yeah.
There you go. Run down front.
Yes. Has anyone tried to make a film of the novels of Zadie Smith, who is, you know,
Amazing.
extraordinarily wonderful?
Yeah, who's amazing. I have a feeling that we've done some TV dramas in the UK. White Teeth, thank you. Yeah, I heard someone say White Teeth. That was a TV series, right? Am I right? I don't know who shouted that out. Yeah, it was a TV series, yeah, but not any films yet. So that is definitely fertile ground to explore. Thank you for that suggestion. Thank you.
Yes, from the balcony to your left.
Hi.
Try to stand. The cinematography was absolutely beautiful.
Ben Smithard.
And so authentic looking. Could you speak just a bit about how much of this was on location and how much was studio?
We did all of it on location, and I think that makes a huge difference. We shot in 5 different, let me get this right, English Heritage National Trust. Sometimes I want to say English Trust National Heritage, get it all the wrong way around. Homes, which are protected homes, sort of around the outskirts of London, where all of the original features are preserved and kept. And we had to shoot all 5 houses, and I had to make it look like one for you. We couldn't shoot in Kenwood House because Kenwood House was being refurbished at the time and is a little bit smaller than the world I needed to fit the size of the cameras in that we needed to fit in. So it's all shot on location. Some of it's shot in the Isle of Man. Much of the exteriors that you see in terms of beautiful gardens and landscape is the Isle of Man. And then we shot in the center of London. I love shutting down the center of London to shoot. It's just something I love doing. So we shot in the center of London and in the gardens of many of those homes. And Ben Smithard is a superb cinematographer who I just loved working with. I think a lot of what you see on screen is also the synergy that we had together. He's a very emotional cinematographer, and I love working with emotional cinematographers because you feel it in what you see on screen, you feel it in their shots, and I hope and I feel that's what you get from his work on Belle.
On the floor, to your left. To your left. Or to your right, I'm sorry, to your right.
Sorry, down on the floor.
Bad
yes,
stage
thank
hand.
you.
Screen left. Hi. I just want to say a little more about the heritage look. So British cinema has that sort of heritage style. Do you want to say a little more about your art design? And you mentioned Austen-esque. I'm just wondering in terms of your desire to make it look like, I mean, it's stunning in terms of the cinematography, sound, etc. And obviously you want it to fit within that sort of tradition while sort of changing some things. So did you ever think about the look early on being maybe more independent or something? So do you want to say more about the production style and why you wanted to fit into the BBC look?
I wanted to go for the straight, pure, period drama look in many ways. I always start with a palette. Palette is very important for me, and palette develops through the piece. So if you look at the beginning, when you rewatch the movie again, and I hope you will, you'll notice that I'm using a lot of ice cream colours for Dido, Belle and Elizabeth when they're in the countryside, and they're cosseted. It's before they're exposed to the world of what it means to be woman and to be of colour. And the rooms are large, and they're like dolls. In a giant doll's house. But as they start to become more aware of their world, they grow bigger, so the ceilings become lower, the colours become deeper, they become more sophisticated. So there's a palette in there that I'm working to through the journey of the young women. But yeah, it was really important for me. I mean, digital cameras these days are very clean and clear, and they show absolutely everything. And I wanted that mystique that film gives, where there's a kind of there's a slight filter between you and the characters on screen, and so we worked very hard on that in post-production. And we worked on a camera, used a camera, the Sony f65, which gives a slightly softer image than the real sharpness that some other digital cameras give. So I think probably what helps is ensuring that we shot in using real architecture. My production designer, Simon Bowles, is just exceptional in his talent and his work. So he worked very hard on furnishing those homes in a way that was very authentic to the period. Anushka, my costume designer, was incredible. The two of them together stuck to the color palette that I came up with. And again, I think there's a synergy between what's going on in production design, costume design, and cinematography, and I think that's what traditional British costume drama does in many ways. And then I think it's about making sure that the language is something that is authentic enough to the period, but isn't so authentic that I have you all, falling asleep while you're listening to it. You've got to find the right hybrid, and that was important.
I think you found just the right hybrid for the language. I loved the language of the set, the language of the speakers, just everything was just period enough, and just
yes,
and just enough of a revision to make it just so relatable. Yeah, to make it work.
There's a funny story. My father was he just lectured all the time. I don't mean in university or anything. And I went to school about an hour away from where we lived, and that was Dad's lecturing time. He would lecture on the way there, and he'd lecture on the way back, and I miss those lectures like crazy now. But my dad, learned English in Ghana, as I say, in colonial Ghana. So he learned very proper English, and he spoke that way. And that comes through in what you see on screen. But my dad sadly got dementia towards the end of his life, and as his language started to disappear, he reverted back to the original way that he was speaking in the 1940s, and it got more and more proper. And in the hospital he would say, "Madam, madam, I beg that you will listen to me." and I suddenly realized that this must have been where I picked it up for Belle, but it was both sad but made me smile at the same time.
The other thing that I noticed tonight, and I know I think I know why, and when I first saw this in the fall of 2013, I was still in a very heavy grief period.
I'm sure.
And so something that was so painful watching tonight that of course I was aware of it in the beginning, but the fact that she couldn't even eat dinner with her own family, and she's the one who has the inheritance, that hurt me viscerally tonight when I was listening to, the things that she had to do. And are those things that you found in literature, or was that something that you added, or where does that come from?
So there was a diary entry from the governor of Massachusetts. He came over to visit Lord Mansfield to lobby him with regards to some decisions that were being made in the UK that were going to have a big impact on slavery in the US. And he mentions in his diary, because he believes that the fact that Lord Mansfield has this black niece that he's raising as a daughter is having an impact on Lord Mansfield's decision, which is going to impact him and his state detrimentally. And so he writes that she wasn't at dinner, but she was allowed to join them after dinner, and she walked arm in arm with her cousin Elizabeth. And he talks about the woolly hair on the back of her neck. And he describes the whole situation, you know, sitting and having dinner without her, but her being able to join afterwards. And that's what I developed from that diary entry. And that's what I mean about taking pieces and having to put it together and come up with something that would make sense on the big screen. In terms of directing this movie, it was... it's different when you're adapting a whole book and everything is there for you and you can throw out what you don't need and take what you do need, but this was all of those pieces. And the family, Lord Mansfield's family, sat with me, and the future Lord Mansfield in particular, who is the custodian of all of that important stuff that is left behind today, including wills. In fact, Lord Mansfield did leave Dido Belle money in his will, and so did her Aunt Mary. And, you know, I was able to see those wills, that kind of thing. They sat with me and walked me through, and so that I had some awareness of it. But it was stitching it all together, yeah.
And how was the movie received when it first opened in England, and how did Lord Mansfield's family, what did they think of it?
Well, so the real painting hangs in Scone Palace, which is where Lord Mansfield was born and is in Perth in Scotland. And I believe that they have been delighted with the movie. The movie was received so well in America. It was received well in the UK, but even better in America. And there are many people who take the trip to the UK, take the trip to Scotland, and will go and see the real painting today. And you can now stay at Scone Palace, for anybody who might wish to, in beautiful accommodation, and actually visit the painting. And it's luminous. I mean, we show a print of it at the end of the film. There is nothing like seeing the real thing. And when I actually did see the real thing, which was right before we started filming, I cried because it was so beautiful. But they were fine, and I think that they are just so happy that there is now a focus on the painting and Dido Belle and their forefather, Lord Mansfield, who is known for many other things in the UK, and now he can be known for his relationship with Dido Belle as well.
Question?
Okay, we have a question right in the back to your left, all the way in the back.
Gotcha.
Yes, I have a question about the painting. Is there a story behind the way the people were arranged in that masterpiece, the two women?
Well, so what I can tell you is that a painting could take up to a year, if not longer, to finish. And oftentimes what would happen with the painting is that the artist would get a sense of the face, sketch the face, and then he'd go back to his studio and he would use models to create the story that he wanted to bring to the painting. But you know, when you're making a movie, you have to pick your battles, and there's a perception that audiences have of the way paintings are created, and I stuck to that perception. There is a BBC piece, documentary, which is coming out very soon, which I just shot a segment for, which is going back and looking at how that painting came together, and is also going back and looking at who might have painted it, because for many years there was this idea that a painter called Zoffany painted it, but that's always been in question. There's always been a big question mark against that. And they believe that they have now found the name of the correct presenter, and that will be on TV, and I believe on PBS in a few weeks. And so you'll be able to find out the whole backstory, I believe, of how that painting came together and who might have painted it. But as far as I know, in terms of the book and the fruit, Elizabeth is holding the book, if you'll remember, and Dido is holding the fruit. That would have been something that the painter put together himself. I did find myself recently standing, though, right in front of the very view that you see in the painting. And it was while we were shooting that documentary, and the director pointed to me, there's the bridge that's in the background of the painting, and I looked. And for all the times that I've been to Kenwood House, I'd never realized that it was right there, kind of in view of the house almost, which is just gorgeous. So stay tuned to PBS, and hopefully you'll see the documentary. Yeah, thank you.
On the floor to your right.
To my right.
Hello, it's a pleasure watching a movie as a young black female.
Thank you.
But my question was, Dido had on one string of pearls and Elizabeth had on two. Was that intentional?
Well, we copied the painting, and we don't know what that means in terms of if it means anything at all, if it was just a personal choice. What I can tell you about is the dresses. So I know that Dido's dress was more modern and more expensive than Elizabeth's, and it's something to do with the way that the silks are and the embroidery, the kind of lace that's at the front. But the choice of 1 and 2 pearls we just took directly from the painting, and we don't know what that might have meant. There might be some amazing fashion historian that might be able to tell me something, but I don't know that we will ever be able to say definitively that wasn't just Dido Belle's choice. Yeah. Thanks for asking, though.
Yes, a question from the balcony to your right.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yes, I just wanted to ask, I know you said you're looking to do more of your own, produce more of your own writing now. So I guess I was just curious about how you choose the projects you get involved with. Do they come to you? Have you gone for them? And what kinds of stories you're looking to tell?
Yeah, I mean, it's every different way you can possibly imagine. With something like $1 Billion Spy, that came to me, but I believe it was out to other directors as well, and I pitched for it, and I love pitching because it exercises different muscles for me. In many ways, some projects, I have a bunch at home that I have to, or I should say in a hotel room, that I have to make sure I read before I get back to London in a couple of days' time. And I'll be reading those that are on offer. And then I'm researching all the time, looking out for stories and trying to generate my own work as well that I'm writing. And some come to me just with basic information about somebody who perhaps lives, so it might be just a summary of their life, it might be some pictures of them, a summary of the story, and a producer might approach me and say, is this a story you would like to tell? And then we might go from there. So I'm kind of just very, very open to all of it. Thank you.
All right, well, question to the center, kind of back to your left.
Yeah. Wave a little.
Where
Gotcha.
are you?
Gotcha.
Here.
Hi. So, my question is more for you as a woman director in the industry. So what's your advice for young women who want to work in or gain a position in the industry?
Be resilient, because I think that especially where we are today, it's a question of not if, but when. And I think what happens with any level of success, whether you're male or female, is that oftentimes people give up right before that turning point comes. And it can feel so frustrating when you've been feeling like you're on the treadmill, running the same space for years and years and years, but you never know when that moment of progress is going to come. So I say be resilient, know that your vision is unique. It may not feel like it, but your eye, your window into the world, the story that you want to tell is unique. You have to believe in that in many ways. I would say get out there and don't wait for projects to come to you. Get out there and shoot your own stuff, whether you have access to a camera. People are shooting stuff on iPhones today. You can platform your work on YouTube. You can create a short, even on an iPhone, that is good enough to go to a film festival, a short film festival. So create a key piece of work that says something about who you are, your voice as a filmmaker, that can be your calling card. It's going to be 10 minutes long, 15 minutes long, but it says something about you. There are amazing young women who are creating online TV series at the moment that I love to hook into. And that is something that didn't exist when I was emerging as a filmmaker. I still feel like I'm emerging, but way back at the beginning. So be resilient, keep nurturing your talent. Learning how to tell stories using images is something that you have all the access in the world to. today. So take advantage of that and get your work seen, you know, and there are many ways to do that today.
You know, it occurred to me, since you didn't go to film school, what's the most difficult, what were your difficulties in directing, especially when you first started directing?
I think getting the trust of the crew, probably in many ways. I think crew was so used to someone who, as I always say, not my shape or my flavor, that it wasn't, no one was, a few people were a bit rude, but most people were not outright rude. It was just a question of constantly being questioned. Why are you choosing this? Why are you doing this? Why are you doing A, B, C, D? And I do not answer those questions anymore. I mean, after the first day of the first film, that had to stop. And of course now with 4 films under my belt, that doesn't happen so much anymore. But getting them to believe that they are collaborating with you on a story that is going to be worthwhile, that is going to have the production quality that they too can be proud of, I think was the most difficult thing in the beginning. And occasionally you have that with actors as well. And you have to, but particularly, listen, if the actors are more experienced than you, I can only do 1 movie every few years. Actors are doing many movies a year, so inevitably they're going to be more experienced than someone like me who had 10 years between my first film and my second film. I was writing for 10 years trying to get a movie off the ground. So persuading them that I have something of value to offer them in terms of drawing out a good performance has occasionally been difficult, but the great thing is that I have calling cards, which is why I was saying to the young lady at the back, make a movie, get a great calling card, like Belle, which I believe has great performances, like A United Kingdom, and my latest film, Why Has a Touch, which stars Amanda Stenberg, who gives an incredible performance in that movie. Having that track record helps, but it can be tough.
The film you just finished, when does that
I think
show?
it'll be the fall of this year, 2018. Yeah.
We have time for one
Question
last
from the center.
question.
Senator?
Low center, yeah, got it.
Hi, thank you very much for this film. It's wonderful. I'm wondering that a statement is probably made by the fact that the vicar's son, her ultimate husband, was from the ruling class, if you will, of the, because he was white, and the fact that he didn't do this for any whatever he did, whatever he believed, he truly believed it, and he had nothing to gain by it. Isn't that really what is that really what happens? That's the way society really is. That it has to be for the right reason. That people do things that not necessarily in their financial interest or their business interest or their social interest. It's to do the right thing.
Yeah, in a sense. I think about Lord Mansfield a little bit more in some ways, though, because I think about the fact that he had everything to gain from the slave trade in many ways. I mean, the people who were buying the ships, the slave ships that were, crossing from the UK to Africa and then the Caribbean or America, were his cousins, his relatives. And there's houses these amazing Georgian houses that we see built, that the money that was financing them came from slavery. And so for him to make a decision which eventually shook the foundations, didn't end slavery, but certainly shook the foundations of it. What I was fascinated with was being in that place where you are caught in tradition on the one hand, and that's the tradition of slavery as it was at that time, but you also have one foot sort of stepping into progress, and you are raising a black daughter. And what happens when you're emotionally torn between those two things? Because this wouldn't have just been about, this would have been about ruining the finances of people that he grew up with, ruining their finances. And so I think about him and what he had or didn't have to gain. And the question that I like to have, which I think empowers Dido Belle, is, was Lord Mansfield that man before he brought her into his world, and that's why he brought her into his world? Or did she have a profound impact on him as a 6-year-old child, and that's why he made that decision and other decisions that came before? and later. And I'll never know. I don't know, but I like to think that he did the right thing. I like to think that he was further impacted by the fact that when you accept and recognize the humanity of an individual, you should, not always, but you should have to recognize the humanity of their people. It doesn't always happen, but it's the way that I would hope that we can move forward. I always say I never met a racist who didn't like me. And what I mean by that is, it's always not you. It's just the other ones, It's that thing. So when you know a human being, it's very hard to make generalized comments about who and what they are. But I hear what you're saying, and I hope it's like that.
I think that's a lovely way to end. You were a lovely guest. Thank you. Your film is beautiful.
Thank you for having me. Thank you, Chaz. Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you all.